Monday morning in the quiet town of Fairbrook was like any other. The scent of freshly brewed coffee filled the kitchen as Matthew Hayes sat at the breakfast table, skimming through the news on his tablet. Across from him, his wife of 7 years, Lauren, fidgeted with her mug, her eyes filled with a storm she had yet to unleash. "Matt, put the tablet down. We need to talk." Sensing the seriousness in her tone, Matthew set the device aside and met her gaze. "What is it?" "I'm leaving you. I want a divorce." For a moment, silence settled between them, thick and heavy. Matthew blinked, processing her words, then, with eerie calm, picked up his tablet again and flipped to the sports section. "Is that all?" he asked nonchalantly. Lauren's jaw clenched. "Damn it, Matt, take this seriously. I can't do this anymore." He let out a slow breath, finally setting the tablet down. "All right, if that's what you want. But let me guess, you're not just leaving, are you? There's someone else." Lauren hesitated before nodding. "His name is Eric." Matthew let out a dry chuckle, shaking his head. "Of course it is." She looked down, guilt flickering in her expression. "I didn't mean for it to happen like this, but you did it anyway." He stood up, stretching as if the conversation was merely an inconvenience. "Pack your things and be out by tonight." Lauren's eyes widened. "You can't be serious." "Dead serious. You made your choice, now deal with it." She swallowed hard, but Matthew was done. Without another word, he walked into his home office and closed the door. An hour later, he had already contacted his lawyer, frozen their joint accounts, and transferred the savings to his private account. If Lauren thought she could walk away unscathed, she was sorely mistaken. Lauren hadn't left by that night, but by morning, Matthew returned home from a night out to find her car missing. He stood in the empty living room, taking in the silence. She was gone. The following weeks were filled with legal battles, bitter exchanges, and silent triumphs for Matthew. Lauren had expected to walk away with half of everything, but Matthew played his cards well. By the time the dust settled, she walked away with far less than she had imagined, and Eric, her so-called escape, was already growing distant. Matthew, on the other hand, thrived. With his newfound freedom, he embraced life with a vigor he hadn't felt in years. And then, there was Emily, a woman who had been a friend for years but suddenly felt like something more. Their connection was effortless, untainted by betrayal or deceit. As the months passed, Lauren's calls became more frequent. The regret in her voice was undeniable, but Matthew had moved on. The life she had so easily discarded was now something she could only watch from a distance. One evening, as Matthew and Emily enjoyed dinner at their favorite restaurant, a familiar face appeared, Lauren, alone, her gaze filled with longing. But Matthew only offered her a polite nod before turning back to the woman who now held his future. However, what seemed like the end was merely the beginning. A week later, Matthew received a cryptic message from an unknown number. "You don't know the whole story. Meet me at Fairbrook Cafe." Curiosity gnawed at him, and against his better judgment, he went. Sitting in the dimly lit corner was Eric, Lauren's lover, his face lined with exhaustion. "I made a mistake," Eric admitted. "She wasn't honest with either of us." Matthew crossed his arms. "Why should I care?" "Because she's not done with you. She's in trouble, Matt. She owes people, dangerous people, money. And I think she's desperate enough to come back to you for help." Matthew's jaw tightened. "That's not my problem." "I thought the same thing," Eric said. "Until I realized she's being followed. And now, so am I." As Matthew drove home, his mind spun. Could Lauren really be tangled in something this dark? His suspicions were confirmed when he arrived to find his front door slightly ajar. Inside, the house was dimly lit. "Lauren," he called cautiously. A shadow moved in the corner, and she stepped forward, her face pale and eyes filled with fear. Matt, please. I need your help. Before he could respond, a sharp knock echoed from the door. Matthew exchanged a wary glance with Lauren before striding over to open it. Two men stood outside, their expressions unreadable. One of them, a tall figure with a scar running down his cheek, smirked. "Evening, Mr. Hayes. Your ex-wife owes us quite a bit of money. We were hoping you'd be generous enough to cover her debt." Matthew exhaled slowly. "She's not my responsibility anymore." The man's smirk widened. "Oh, but she is. Unless you'd like to find out what happens when debts go unpaid." Lauren clutched Matthew's arm. "Please, don't let them take me." For the first time in months, Matthew felt the stirrings of something unexpected, protectiveness, or maybe just the instinct to fight back. And he knew, whether he liked it or not, the past wasn't finished with him yet. Matthew stood in the doorway, the two men's threatening presence pressing in on him. Lauren's grip on his arm tightened, her face a mask of desperation. "We can take care of this the easy way," the man with the scar on his cheek said, his voice a low, threatening drawl. "Or we can make it more memorable." Matthew's pulse quickened. The old part of him, the one that had been indifferent and emotionally detached, fought to maintain control. But seeing Lauren so vulnerable, so broken, was pulling him in a direction he hadn't expected. He stepped aside, allowing the men to enter. "What do you want?" he asked, his voice steady, betraying none of the internal conflict gnawing at him. "We'll discuss terms," the other man said, a stocky figure with a thick neck and dead eyes. He looked around the house, sizing things up. "Where's the cash, Mr. Hayes? You're good for it, aren't you?" Lauren began to cry softly, her shoulders shaking. "Matt, please, they'll hurt me. I don't know what else to do." Matthew swallowed hard. It wasn't just the money. It was the fact that Lauren had gotten herself into this mess and now expected him to clean it up. He had moved on, had found something better with Emily. And now here she was, dragging him back into a life he had desperately tried to leave behind. Still, he couldn't let her face these men alone. "How much does she owe?" Matthew asked, trying to maintain an air of negotiation. The scarred man chuckled. "It's not a simple number, Mr. Hayes. But we can start with 25,000. Matthew took a deep breath. It was an amount he could pay, but that didn't mean he wanted to. Every part of him screamed to refuse, to shut the door and walk away. But Lauren's eyes, filled with tears, stopped him. "I don't want her back," he muttered, more to himself than anyone else. "But I'm not going to let this happen to her." Lauren flinched at his words, but Matthew couldn't find the energy to care about her guilt anymore. She had made her choices, and now she was paying the price. "Fine," he said, his voice cold. "But I need your word that you'll stay away from her after this." The man with the scar nodded, as if Matthew's request was inconsequential. "We'll take the money, Mr. Hayes, and we'll take care of things. You won't have to worry about this again." Matthew reached into his wallet, retrieving the amount in cash. He handed it over with a steady hand, watching as the men counted it, their faces devoid of gratitude. They took the money without further word and left, disappearing into the night like shadows. As soon as the door closed, the weight on Matthew's chest seemed to lift, but only slightly. Lauren was still standing there, trembling, her face pale. "Why did you do that?" she whispered, her voice breaking. "Why did you help me?" Matthew stared at her for a moment, then looked away, his eyes distant. "Because I'm not heartless, Lauren. But that doesn't mean I'm going to fix everything for you." Lauren took a shaky breath, her eyes filling with remorse. "I never meant to drag you back into this. I never meant for any of this to happen." Matthew's gaze softened for just a moment, but then it hardened again. "You made your bed, Lauren. I didn't ask you to come back here, and I'm not going to play savior." Lauren nodded, understanding the finality in his words. She had been foolish to think she could simply walk back into his life when everything had already been broken. The illusion of their marriage had been shattered long ago, and she had played a large part in it. "I'll leave now," she said, her voice small. "I don't want to make things worse." Matthew didn't respond. He didn't need to. The door clicked shut behind her as she left, the sound echoing in the empty house. The next day, Matthew found himself lost in thought more than once. The events of the previous night were still fresh in his mind, how easily the past had crept back into his life, and how little he had wanted to welcome it. But life went on. He called Emily, telling her about the incident, though he left out some of the details. He didn't want to burden her with the full weight of what had happened, but he could see in her eyes when they met later that evening that she knew something was wrong. "You don't have to talk about it if you don't want to," Emily said as they sat together in his living room, her hand gently covering his. "But I want you to know, I'm here. No matter what." For the first time in weeks, Matthew felt something more than just the scars of his past. He felt the warmth of something new, something untainted by betrayal or regret. Emily had been a steady presence in his life, someone who made him believe in a future that wasn't defined by the fractures of his marriage. "I'm not going back to her, Emily," he said, his voice steady but filled with a resolve he hadn't fully embraced before. "I can't." "I know," she replied, her fingers tightening around his. "And you don't have to. You've already paid for that past, in ways I don't think anyone should." Matthew nodded, knowing that she was right. But as he looked forward, he couldn't help but feel a twinge of fear that his past might still come back to haunt him. And in the back of his mind, the possibility that Lauren might return again, this time for something more than money, lingered like a dark shadow. It was 2 weeks later when Lauren reached out to him again, her voice pleading. "Matt, please, I don't know what else to do. Eric left me. He's gone, and I'm alone. I can't do this anymore. I need you." This time, Matthew didn't respond immediately. He thought about the years he had spent with her, the trust they had once shared, and the way it had all crumbled. He thought about Emily, about the peace he had begun to find in her presence. Finally, he spoke, his voice soft but firm. "No, Lauren. You made your choices, and I made mine. I'm done." And with that, Matthew hung up the phone for the last time, setting the final boundary between his past and his future. He turned to Emily, who was sitting across from him, a gentle smile on her face. "We're moving forward," he said quietly. "Together." And this time, for the first time in a long while, Matthew felt the weight of the past finally lifting, truly gone, for good. Thanks so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this story. If you did, please hit the like button and share your thoughts in the comments below. I would love to hear what you think. Your feedback really helps me create better content for you. Don't forget to subscribe so you never miss an update. Thanks again and see you in the next video. Take care.